Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com, and I'm here with one of my favorite people, Kimberly Reef. How are you, Kim?
Doing good. Thanks, Glenn. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you here today. And we agreed, really rather you agreed, that we could talk about some of our most challenging moments and maybe what prepared us to overcome them and what we've learned from them and that kind of thing. So can I let you go first?
Yeah. Did you have a specific challenging moment, or should I just launch into some of mine?
Launch into yours. The only challenging moments I've had in recent years have been on dates, especially on a first date when I feel a lot of pressure and I don't want to make a lot of explanations about how I eat and why I eat this way. And I really don't like to have that conversation on the first date.
No, of course not. Yeah, that's awkward.
Why don't you go first? Why don't you go through a couple?
Okay. Mine are the typical ones that I think pop up for a lot of people. And then I had a specific one that was less typical. Obviously, those things, traveling, holidays, parties, that same thing that you're talking about, like on a date where it's awkward. One of the things that we say constantly here at Defeat Your Cravings is people are not paying as much attention to you as you think they are, but it's still awkward to be in a group and not be joining in, to be following a different way of being than everybody else in the room. And so that's interesting. But the main thing that I dealt with in the last few years that really was difficult, it was very difficult, and it was when my mom passed. And I was 3,000 miles from home, my home at my parents', where I stayed for a month, basically watching my mom pass with the rest of the family and being with her. And it was rough. It was really rough because my brother is a chef who owns a couple of restaurants, and food is life in the family that I grew up in. And there was just food everywhere, the worst food, just the stuff we don't eat.
How did you handle it? When was this, Kim, by the way?
This was almost 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years ago this summer. I had pretty much just got to my goal weight and was learning how to maintain that. It was really difficult. And when you say, how did I handle it? It was real mixed. Sometimes I handled it well. Some days were good. Some days were not. But mostly what I learned through all of that was that it was okay when I got back home to get back on the horse and to totally recover and to devote myself to that. It was part of my healing process after the passing of my mom and after the turmoil of being with family that long, to be able to really take care of myself, go back home and say, okay, that's over. And now I have to take care of myself. And it was good. It was like a reinvesting in myself.
What did that look like? What did you specifically do differently? How did you give yourself permission?
I completely went back to recommitting to my 3 R's that I do every morning because it was hit or miss when I was gone.
Rules, reasons, and refutations, right?
Yep. Rules, reasons, and refutations. I rewrote my rules. I rewrote my reasons. I looked at it fresh. Like I looked at everything as if, okay, I'm starting over. And in the past, to be honest with you, there were lots of times in my life where it was like, okay, this has got to be a do-over. But I often did the do-over by selecting a different thing. I have to explain that. That idea of like, that diet didn't work, I'll try something else. And in the meantime, I'll be off the rails until I discover my new thing. And what I love about everything to do with Defeat Your Cravings and all of your techniques and teachings is that I didn't have to discover something else. I already had the thing that I knew worked beautifully and that I could be strong with. So that idea of really being excited to recommit to the old thing rather than discovering a new thing was kind of huge for me, being able to say, oh no, I know how to do this. I know.
I find that so often that when people have something that's working and then they're destabilized by some life event, sometimes it's just Christmas or the holidays, like it's just a week away. Their pig jumps in and says, well, that thing didn't work. We've got to throw that away entirely. And no, use a working out analogy. You figured out the form of the exercise. You were able to do good workouts when you had a regular routine and all the resources and supplies around you. And you hadn't figured out how to handle this higher amount of weight on the bar. It was a harder squat to do. It was harder overhead press to do or something like that. And you put too much weight on the bar and you couldn't do it. That doesn't mean you can't do all the lighter ones anymore. You have to go back and get strong enough to figure out what you do with the next heavy bar that comes along. But you don't have to throw everything out the window and just do it all over.
Right, exactly. You're not going to quit the gym and join a different gym. What would be the point? And that's interesting that you say that because that's the thing that I'm thinking that was kind of the miracle, even in that bad experience that I was having, is what used to be getting back to normal meant going back to binging and living that unconscious life. That was normal. But for me, after experiencing everything that I had, losing all the weight, regaining my health, working the whole thing for 2 years, getting to that maintenance point, and then having a really rough time for a month, getting back to normal meant going back to not binging and following my rules. And that had become normal to me. So, I was having this abnormal experience being away from home and in all this turmoil and sadness. And getting back to normal meant getting back to following the rules and doing my thing, which was nice. Very comforting.
That's a really important insight. Can I ask you one more question before we go on?
Yeah.
So having had that experience, obviously we would help people, like we would help our clients to get back to not binging, get back to what was working really well already rather than panicking and trying to find something totally different. But if you had a client whose mom just passed away and they were going to go stay with family for a month, how would you help them prepare? What would you do differently having had the experience?
Oh, yeah. Well, it would have made the entire situation more pleasant if I had not allowed myself to be pulled away from my rules. It would have been such a stabilizing force for me that instead of getting out of bed each morning and joining the fray that was happening, if I had taken 10 minutes to center myself and do my 3 R's in the bathroom, in the bedroom, wherever I could find that peace. But like I said, there were days that I said to myself, you have to do that. It will be good for you. But there were other days that I allowed myself to be, no, this is too crazy. I can't even take a moment for myself.
Yeah, so you can forgive yourself for the mistakes that you made. But in retrospect, if you could have made it more of a priority, then it would have worked out better for you.
I should have made it a priority. I really should have. I mean, what was going on was so monumental that I didn't. I lost myself in it. I should have clung to at least that little bit. I mean, even if for the rest of the day the eating didn't roll out the way it should have or whatever, I still would have had that little piece of myself and not given it away. It would have made the whole experience for me less hard.
When my dad died, my sister was a little mad at me about this, but I didn't spend 24 hours a day with the family. I flew up there and it was helping take care of things, but I always made sure I had like a half hour twice a day just to go take care of myself. And it made all the difference in the world. And I feel like I was more present for the family as my dad was dying, and I was better able to help the other people to eat well and take care of themselves and make some decisions we had to make along the way. It was a struggle. I can't say it was super easy, but when I remembered that eating healthy is really my center, the food rules that I've come up with and the techniques I have for following them, I feel very much decentered if I don't do it. I've had times when I've made mistakes over the years and I felt really decentered, but the more you can center yourself with that, no matter what's going on, the better it is. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. What made you realize that you needed to take that time for yourself? Because that was not a realization I had. I do now in retrospect after having the experience. I mean, was this something that you learned about when you were in school, or did you just realize it innately?
Oh gosh, I'll tell you a story. This is a crazy story. Okay. September 12th, 2001, right after the tragedy with the World Trade Center, I had owned this focus group business. This is a crazy story. I don't think I've ever told this publicly. So back then, we didn't have these email servers. And I had a Ukrainian programmer who built me one instead. So you couldn't just go to Aweber or MailChimp or something like that and get yourself an email list. There weren't those services available. So I had a Ukrainian programmer put one together for me. In the system, we had a focus group facility, which meant that we recruited people to come take part in focus groups, and we had to screen them for various criteria and purchase habits and things like that. And on September 12th, we had about 20,000 people who had signed up for that. And we had this facility with three really nice rooms for running groups. My ex-wife and I at the time decided that, well, how can we help? This is a real tragedy. How can we help? The best thing we can do to give back is we'll run some groups. We'll run some support groups, PhDs in psychology. And why don't we run them according to gender and age so that people have something similar in common? And we'll send out an email, recruit them, and we'll probably get groups going all day, and we'll feel like we really did something to help. Send out a message which says World Trade Center groups in the subject line and World Trade Center disaster groups in the subject line. And in the body of the message, it says, we're running these groups to talk about your feelings about the World Trade Center's disasters. Please leave your gender and age and whether you'd like to come. I forgot that in the subject line of that email system, it automatically inserted the words get paid because we used to pay for people to come in to participate in focus groups.
Oh, wow.
So now on September 12th in New York City, this is just outside New York City on Long Island, I send out a message to 20,000 people that says, get paid, World Trade Center disaster.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Please let me know your gender and age and if you'd like to come. Okay, it gets much worse from there.
Oh, no.
Much, much worse. Turns out the Ukrainian programmer made a mistake, and the email system was kind of new, and it worked more like a listserv than a broadcast. So what that meant is that if anybody replied to the email, that reply was further broadcast out to all 20,000 people. One of the first replies was from this young woman. I think her name was Kim, actually. And she says, hi, I'm Kim. I'm 34 and I'd like to come. And that email goes out to 20,000 people who write back that, how dare you try to take advantage of this? It's way too soon. Why can't you take advantage anyway? And call it all kinds of horrible names because she looks like she's a pornographer or something trying to solicit people. Okay. Those people write back with all kinds of names, you, SLUT, all these kind of things. Those emails go out to 20,000 people. It's like I started a war on the internet and then all 20,000 people write back like that. And before I know it, the phone is ringing off the hook. The president of our research association was calling. I'm surprised the Psychology Association didn't call. We're getting death threats, and I had to figure out how to change this woman's phone number and bring her in. And it was horrible. And I had 21 people working for me then, so I had a little bit of help, but basically around the clock where we're just facing this onslaught of disaster. You asked me, how did I learn that I had to take care of myself? I wasn't particularly good at it at that point, but I had no choice. It was not possible to stay up for 3 days straight, handling that level of stress and problems without taking an hour off here and there to go take a breath and figure out what was next and, feed myself and figure out what to do. I actually didn't binge through that period. That was kind of towards the end of my binging days, so I hadn't really figured out all the defeat your craving stuff by then. But I actually didn't binge. I actually took pretty good care of myself through those couple of days. I think I might have binged when it was all over. This was 23 years ago. That's the first place that I learned. I had also been supervised that what you do when someone is going through a tragedy is you focus first and foremost on self-care. Sleep and water and food and enough time alone and contact with people that they know and love that support them. I was taught that people feel very guilty about needing to take care of the whole family and that kind of an emergency, but what they really need to do is take care of themselves. and then they'll be there to take care of the family. If you don't take care of yourself, you really can't do yourself or anybody else any good. So
Well, and it's interesting because the inner pig will tell us that sneaking a snack or going off to eat sweets or something is somehow taking care of yourself. And of course, we absolutely know that it's completely the opposite.
and for some reason, that seems more acceptable than just going to take care of yourself in some other way.
Oh, yeah, my entire family was unbelievable. The bagels and the sweets and the donuts were just flowing like water.
Are you sure you're not Jewish?
I did grow up on Long Island. My husband and I like to tell people that, technically we're not, but we're Jewish by osmosis. So, like almost all my friends in the neighborhood I grew up in. So, yeah,
I grew up on Long Island with bagels too, so I
yeah,
understand.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's how I learned. Yeah.
yep, cool.
So do you have another couple of moments that you could tell me about and what you do to take care of it?
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's all the normal times, the traveling, the holidays, the parties. And the thing that I have found over the 4 years that I've been messing around with this, and in the 2 years that I've been completely at maintenance, and in case nobody's ever heard me before, which I think everybody has heard me at this point, I lost over 80 pounds. And actually, I was over 100 pounds overweight at one point in my life. I know what I'm talking about. The point is, though, is that the key to all of it is planning. Planning, 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 planning ahead, no spontaneous pig parties. You're not allowed to declare that it's a holiday today if it's actually not a holiday. So, and none of this like, oh, my friend asked me over spontaneously to have a cup of tea and now I'm going to eat all the cake because I wasn't planning that. No, and that's the whole key to it is planning. Don't eat it if you didn't plan it.
Eating by design. Yeah.
Exactly. And when it comes to traveling, holidays, and parties, for me personally, it became important to create exceptions. And sometimes it worked to be like, nope, I follow my rules, my plain old daily rules, no matter what is happening. But then once I got to that maintenance point, it did become important to be able to say, hey, I'm allowed to have a cookie on Christmas and to experiment with it. Can I have one or will it make me crave more? Will I become uncomfortable with the idea of wanting more and more and more? And luckily, I was able to work through that with refutations and stuff. And I can seriously say right now that I can plan a special treat because of a holiday or traveling or whatever and not fall off the wagon, so to speak. To enjoy that treat and be done with it and not be tortured with a desire for more. And people have to discover for themselves what can they do and what can't they do. Like for you personally, and I know everybody's heard about your chocolate thing where you experimented like crazy with how can I have just a little bit of chocolate and then ultimately discovered, yeah, I can't have any.
None was a lot easier than some. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what people have to decide for themselves. Are the cravings worth it to have that little bit and then have it in the back of my mind that I want more? Or can I get over that? Or should I just not have any because the cravings drive me nuts and I don't want to deal with it? Everybody can be different when it comes to that and specific foods. But yeah, I told you about the terrible time, and we all have those, whether it's a sickness or a death, something that happens that kind of throws you for a loop. But I find on a regular basis, it's more the happy times that are that are problematic.
Tell me.
The parties and the traveling and the holidays, and where you have to plan. I have to plan for them. I have to be able to say to myself, okay, these are my rules. This is where I'm going to create an exception. We're going to be on the road. I know we're going to be eating in restaurants. How do I want to handle that? And write it down, put it in writing, and do it in advance, not that thing where you're doing it on the fly and you're hoping for the best, most of us, if we're planning a trip, know that we're planning a trip.
That's actually how I handle first dates. It's the only time I ever feel extraordinarily pressure and feel a little bit tempted to make a bunch of mistakes. It's the one thing missing in my life. I've been looking for love for a long time, and I usually want the first dates to go well. I live mostly on fruit and vegetables and nuts and seeds and, some sweet potatoes and maybe some beans once in a while. And so I eat a different kind of diet than most people. And I don't preach that, like I don't require a partner that eats like that. But people get immediately uncomfortable about their own diet. And then I've noticed that women start thinking, well, how am I going to cook for this guy? how can I make him his lasagna? How can I make him happy? And then depending upon the restaurant, there's an awful lot of pressure to make the woman comfortable about food, and food always comes up in a first date. I try not to go to restaurants for first dates if I can avoid it, but sometimes it's hard. And because I'd rather not die alone, just
Right. Just keep at it.
I'm not giving up. I'm
Yeah.
not giving up. And the best thing I found to do is to look at the menu online beforehand, write down exactly what I'm going to have. If there's no dish on the menu that looks like it would work for me, then I'll figure out some combination of ingredients I could ask them about, and I'll call ahead of time and ask them if they'll be willing to do that. I write it down in my Google Calendar. So I'll have the date planned in my Google Calendar. And then I get to the date early and I go and I reread exactly what I was going to have and my exact plan. And then there aren't really any decisions to make in the context of all of those. A first date is hard enough by itself, but all of the emotions and pressure in a restaurant is hard enough by itself, with all the temptations and, smells and visual stimulation. I don't have to think about it. I go in and I order exactly what I wrote down, and I did exactly what I wrote down. Since I started doing that, it's fairly easy to get through that, but that's the time that I felt most tempted.
Yeah, the whole concept of planning. I mean, basically you're planning ahead and that's what I tell clients and people all the time, plan ahead. And you can have a plan for spontaneity. I know that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but for the longest time, I don't need this now, but I had a second set of rules that were basically my spontaneity rules.
What do you mean?
What happens if you get a last minute invitation that you didn't plan for? You're spending the day with a friend and you're planning to go home and cook your own dinner later when the time with the friend is over. You're having such a great time and they say, hey, come back to my house and I'm going to cook dinner for you. And instead of being like, no, I can't do that because it's going to break my rules.
Right.
Right. What do you
Right.
do? And I did. I had rules and then I had exceptions rules. That really helped with that.
So an example would be?
An example would be things like for dinner at the time, some of my rules were very, very specific. For dinner, I always have 1 portion of protein and 2 vegetables. And in that case, I would say I have a portion of protein, a portion of carbohydrate. People that cook more average meals, they're cooking pasta and bread and potatoes, and those are things that I generally avoid. At least I did back then. I really don't have to avoid them now, which is amazing. That's a whole other podcast. But, like I would add things in. It was more important for me to follow my rules and to feel strong in that I planned it and I did what I planned than what the rules actually were.
Yep, exactly.
I could have wrote in the rule and I'm allowed to eat a big piece of cake. You would think, well, that doesn't sound very healthy. That's not really what we're all about here. But on the other hand, it's like if I ate the piece of cake and I didn't eat all the cookies, then dang it, I followed my rule.
You're not allowing your whims and emotions and impulses to take control.
Exactly. It was more about getting control of myself and having self-discipline, changing my mindset than it was what I was actually doing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that self-discipline thing, I can't say enough about it. It's something I never had before, but boy, I have it in spades now. So empowering.
Are there any other examples of really difficult situations that you navigated?
The holidays are always rough because they roll out and they never stop. People will say, oh, I'm making a special rule for Christmas. And it's like, yeah, but the family party is on Christmas Eve. And 3 days before Christmas, there's the office party. And 4 days before Christmas, there's the neighborhood block party. There's all the events up in town and people that are churchgoers, the potluck dinners are endless. It seems like the entire 2 months that comprise Thanksgiving until the New Year. And for some people, it starts at Halloween.
It's an overwhelming food orgy.
It's like 3 months, 2 or 3 months that can be like, well, every day feels like an exception. And then if you're not good at recovery, and I tell people this all the time too, rather than saying to yourself, I will never make a mistake, which is the aiming with perfection. And we do need to do that because it is possible to never make a mistake. It really is. But on the other hand, you also have to somewhere plan for how you're going to handle it if you do make a mistake.
Yes, it's a paradox.
Yep. And I tell people constantly that recovering is more than half the battle. Knowing how to recover, knowing how to not let it roll out. I mean, all of us do it.
How do you do that?
Being really strong and realizing that recovery is important. Being able to say, I went to a party, I was not expecting blah, blah, blah to be served. I ended up deciding that I was going to have a little bit of that. I broke my rule. I came home. I was not happy with myself. But right now, not tomorrow, not next week, not, oh, I'm going to sit in my unhappiness for 3 days and binge. Don't do that. Don't have one mistake be an excuse to make 20 more mistakes. Or as you say, and I love this analogy sticks in my head so strongly, just because I chipped my tooth does not mean I need to go grab a hammer and knock the rest of them out, right?
I don't know what was on my mind when I came up with that.
I love it so much. It's so visual. I mean, and of course, visual like in a cartoon way. I'm thinking of the cartoon with the guy's teeth falling out. I think if I thought of a real person hitting their teeth with a hammer, I'd be horrified. But it's so obvious that it's like, okay, you made a mistake. Think about why. Think about what you might have done differently. Think about how your plan got violated, or maybe you didn't have a plan and that's what the problem was. That's what I find mostly happens to people when I say, okay, well, what about your plan did you violate? And they'll say, actually didn't have a plan. And it's like, well, there you go. That would have been the fix, to have a plan. Once you determine that, then you immediately have to say, okay, but right in this moment, it's a new moment. It's a new moment and a new chance to get this right, to be perfect.
And you can always use the present moment to be healthy.
Absolutely.
Every bite counts.
Exercising the now muscle. I'm doing it now, not later, not after the next binge, not, oh, I'll start fresh tomorrow.
There is no later. There really is no later.
There isn't. There isn't. And I like to make the pig wait for later. And I know you've heard me say that, and your audience probably has too. You know, that became one of my strongest refutations when I figured it out, is that the pig was always saying, oh, you can do better on your plan later. And finally, I got angry and I said, no, you wait for later. You wait for your binge. You'll get to binge later. Right now, I'm taking care of me and I'm going to do the best for me. And the pig can wait for later.
How about you start tomorrow, pig? Enough of this start tomorrow stuff. How about you start tomorrow?
Exactly. Or Monday. What is it about Mondays that people always do that? I'm going to start fresh on Monday. Oh, or they feel like they have to eat up all the bad food in their house first, and then that becomes their fresh start.
I tell people that if food is garbage, it's garbage before you eat it. You don't have to throw it away in your stomach.
It was my dear friend Meg who one time, this was way before I knew anything about you, and she certainly didn't. We were at a Renaissance festival and they were selling cheesecake dipped in chocolate on a stick that people were walking around eating. And she bought it and she took a bite of it. And then she took it in her hand, the little stick, and tossed it in a trash can as we walked past. And her husband was with her and he went, oh, that was like $8. I can't believe you just tossed that out. I can't believe you put it in the trash can. And she looked at him and said, well, I didn't like it. And my body is not a trash can. I always remember that too, when it comes to like throwing out bad food that you've purchased, even if it's never been opened. It's like, I bought these cookies. I didn't even open the package. They're brand new. But you know what? It's trash, and I'm not a trash can. Why would I put it in me?
Exactly. Or people that worry about the money that they wasted because they already bought something. I tell them you wasted it when you bought it.
Absolutely. And why would you waste more by making yourself sick? I know you and I a couple of years ago did a podcast about that, about this idea of how much more expensive is that package of cookies going to get when it gives you diabetes and you have to go on expensive medicine and you have to get expensive tests and you have to buy new clothes because you got fat and your clothes don't fit, you know, or you know what I mean? Like, how expensive is it to be unhealthy?
And if it really bothers you, you can drive down and give it to your local church or food pantry or homeless person or something like that. The last thing I'll say about that is that most people don't realize that when you overeat, you're wasting food anyway because your system is only equipped to digest so much. And when you have too much in your system, it ferments and putrefies. You don't get the nutrition from it. So you're actually wasting food by overeating the food.
Yeah, I got into a conversation just recently with my husband about the concept of, and I know this sounds really strong, like the concept of, is it unethical or immoral to eat more than you need? Is there a morality issue to overeating?
What do you think?
Well, yeah, for me, there definitely is.
Because
Because what we have on this earth is limited. All of our resources are limited. It doesn't go on forever. And if you're consuming more than you need, then I don't know, it's not like you're taking it out of the mouth of somebody else, but you kind of are.
hmm,
And that idea of just, I don't know.
I agree with you. I think it's true, but I find that I don't get too far with that argument with people because overeaters tend to be people who feel more guilt than they should, and so they kind of get stuck. But I mean, you could investigate the carbon footprint of what you're actually eating. Most people don't recognize what those carbon footprints are. We're very focused on what we're driving or idling the car or what the oil companies are producing, but we're not really focused on the carbon footprint of our food. And in some ways, it can be worse than all those other things. I think there are moral issues. I haven't found it to date to be really helpful to help people to stop. I think it can be helpful to people when they reach an advanced level, when they really have control and they're feeling safe about their ability to subjugate their whims and impulses. And when they really feel like they're in control of their pig, then if you think about the morality of it, it seems to help. But before then, I find it almost makes things worse.
Absolutely. I mean, guilt and shame, we're not interested in making people feel guilty or shameful. I mean, we already all struggle with that idea of empathicness. Going back to what you were talking about with the dating, going out on a date, it occurred to me that as a person who has a lot of empathy, is it the discomfort? That idea of somebody feeling judged, they see you eating really clean and healthy, and then they really wanted to order the fried chicken or the French fries or whatever, or the big dessert. And now they feel like they can't because they feel like you're going to judge them. And I find that for me, other people's discomfort makes me more uncomfortable than my own discomfort. Does that make any sense?
I think I'm pretty good at giving people permission to do that. I had a first date last night, actually, and she ordered a really big bowl of ice cream and a nice woman. I don't think she felt any discomfort at all about that.
Good for her.
I don't mean to disagree with you, Kim, by the way. I think that that is a really big factor for a lot of people, feeling like you don't want to make them to feel judged because you are empathic with them.
Like, I'm going to end up eating the wrong thing just to make them uncomfortable. Like, I know you want to eat the ice cream, so I'll eat ice cream with you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I got to the point a long time ago where I decided that I was done harming myself with food to make other people feel better. If it came down to it and they were going to feel bad because I wasn't harming myself with food, I thought, well, then they can feel bad. That's okay. For me, it's more like I don't want to die alone. I'm scared they're going to reject me if I don't eat the way
Oh,
that,
yeah,
yeah. I stick to my guns anyway, and I navigate my way through. Thank you for saying that.
yeah.
Yeah, is there anything else that we should have talked about today? Any other situation you wanted to mention or?
No, I can't really think of anything that we've left out. Oh, just that concept of self forgiveness. We say it all the time, right? Aim with perfection, forgive with dignity. And that is a huge part of that recovery concept of plan to not make a mistake, but also have a plan if you do make a mistake.
Yeah,
The highest part of that plan is look at the mistake, figure out what you might have done differently, and then stop ruminating and get right back to it.
as fast as you can, and also have a plan for about 72 hours, not to have anything sugary or high glycemic, and to eat regularly. You don't make up for a binge with one day of restriction or starvation or overexercise. You make up for it with a week of normal eating. I want to say one or two more things about guilt and shame and overeating because I put a lot of thought into this and I really do agree that in the long run, it's helpful to consider all the different moral issues. In the short run, I think it's important to remember that there aren't any prisons for overeaters. You're not going to wake up in a room with four gray walls and your new husband or wife, Ethel or Bubba, because you had too many donuts. That it's not the same as over drinking or over drugging, where you could get behind the wheel of a car and maim or kill somebody if you have a couple of drinks. It generally doesn't involve stealing or really harming other people. I think on the scale of things, I think it's a minor sin. On the scale of things, I think it's a minor sin and not really where I want people to focus on to begin with. I do consider it, and I have made certain food choices for environmental reasons, and there are others that I'm considering making for environmental reasons that I feel a little guilty about. It's on the list. It's something I'm thinking about. I'm glad you brought that up so we could have that conversation.
Oh, yeah, about the morality ethics of overeating. Yeah. The only reason why I brought it up is I'm remembering my husband and I just last night got into a conversation about that. And it was more of a philosophical conversation than it was, now, what are we going to do about this? you know?
Well, now here's the other moral issue is when you have a family or people that you love. Most people don't just drop dead of a heart attack. 80% of the people that have cardiovascular disease or diabetes or some diet preventable or slowing form of cancer or autoimmune or something like that, where diet's really a factor, most people wind up disabled in some way and someone has to take care of them. Or they're not able to work and they can't provide for their family. And so, there are those issues to think about. People have this idea they're going to have too many donuts one night and wake up dead, but that's not really how it works usually.
No, it's a slow trickle. And again, financially, what does it do to your family's finances? What else could you have done with that money that might have helped others or just been nice rather than needing all the medical care and that kind of thing?
Exactly.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.